What happens when a woman with a hidden identity is wrongfully accused by a corrupt cop? Can she stand her ground when the system seems to be rigged against her? In a world where truth is often overlooked, one woman's fight for justice could expose more than just a lie. Will she win, or will the truth be buried forever? Watch to find out. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the quiet streets of Alexandria, Virginia. The air was crisp, and Ariana Cole, an NSA cybersecurity analyst, was finally heading home after a long, intense briefing at Fort Belvoir. She wasn't thinking about work anymore, just about unwinding with a glass of wine and catching up on the latest season of her favorite show. Her black BMW cruised steadily down the suburban road, the hum of the engine a comforting background noise. She adjusted her rearview mirror and frowned slightly. A police cruiser. She hadn't noticed it at first, but now, as she took a right turn onto a quieter street, she realized the vehicle had been following her for several minutes. Ariana's grip on the wheel tightened. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't violating any traffic laws. So why was the officer tailing her? The familiar, unsettling feeling crawled up her spine. Being a black woman in America meant always being aware, always being prepared for the moment when the wrong cop on the wrong day decided she was a problem. Then the sirens flared. Flashing red and blue lights lit up her rearview mirror. Ariana exhaled sharply. Here we go. She slowed the car, flicked on her turn signal, and pulled over to the side of the road. Her movements were smooth, controlled, nothing sudden, nothing alarming. She knew how this worked. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained neutral as she rolled down her window. The officer approached with the kind of slow, deliberate steps that screamed, "I'm in charge here." He was tall, broad-shouldered, and walked with the arrogance of a man who had never had to second-guess his authority. His name tag read Calloway. Ariana had heard the name before. Brett Calloway, a problem cop, the kind who made the news for allegations that never stuck, the kind with a history of excessive force complaints that got buried under bureaucratic nonsense. This was bad. "License and registration," Calloway said, his voice clipped and unfriendly. "No hello, no ma'am, no pretense of courtesy." Ariana nodded, already reaching into her glove compartment for the documents. She made sure her movements were slow and deliberate, no sudden jerks, nothing that could be misinterpreted. She handed them over. "Officer, may I ask what this stop is about?" she asked, keeping her tone steady. Calloway barely glanced at her paperwork before looking back at her with a smirk. "You swerved back there. Also, your left brake light is out." Ariana blinked. Swerved. That was a lie, and her brake light. She had just gotten her car serviced 2 weeks ago. There was no way. "Are you sure about that, officer?" she asked, careful to keep her voice neutral. "I don't believe I swerved, and my car passed inspection recently." Calloway's smirk vanished. His expression hardened. "You questioning me?" Ariana's stomach nodded. This was a game, a power play. She had two choices: argue and risk escalating the situation, or play along and hope this ended quickly. "I'm just trying to understand," she said smoothly. "I want to make sure everything's in order." Calloway didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back and jerked his thumb. "Step out of the car." Ariana's breath hitched. "Excuse me." "Out, now." Her pulse quickened. "This isn't right. This isn't normal." "Officer, is there a reason?" Calloway's hand went to his holster, not drawing his gun, just resting there. A silent warning. Ariana swallowed her anger and did as she was told. She moved slowly, stepping onto the pavement, hands at her sides. "Turn around," he ordered. She did. She heard him moving behind her, felt his presence looming. Then, without warning, she felt his hands patting her down. "What exactly are you looking for?" she asked, keeping her voice even despite the rage simmering beneath the surface. Just checking, he said lazily, as if she had no right to question him. When he was done, he stepped away and motioned toward her car. Pop the trunk. Ariana froze. You don't have probable cause to search my vehicle. Calloway's lips curled into a smirk. I don't need probable cause if you consent. I'm not consenting. His smirk widened as if he had been waiting for this response. Fine, he said. I'll call in a K-9 unit. We'll sit here all night if we have to. Ariana exhaled sharply. She could push back, demand to see a warrant, argue that he had no grounds, but she knew how this worked. If she resisted, even within her legal rights, Calloway would twist it into non-compliance or obstruction. So she made a choice. Go ahead, she said. Calloway stepped forward and popped the trunk himself. He rummaged through her belongings, tossing things aside carelessly. Her overnight bag, a jacket, some books, nothing suspicious, nothing illegal. After a few minutes, he slammed the trunk shut. Get back in the car, he said. Ariana did, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Calloway disappeared for a moment, presumably running her license. When he returned, he was holding her insurance documents. This expired last month, he said. Ariana's head snapped up. That's not possible, she said. I renewed it. Calloway's smirk was back. Well, according to the system, you're driving without insurance. Her heart pounded. This was wrong. He's lying. He's setting me up. I have proof, she said quickly. I can show you on my phone. Calloway's hand was on his holster again. Step out of the car. Ariana's stomach dropped. No, she said firmly. This isn't right. His smirk turned into a sneer. You're resisting. She knew what came next. Before she could say another word, Calloway grabbed her wrist and yanked her forward. You're under arrest for driving without insurance and obstructing a police investigation, he declared. Ariana's breath came fast and shallow. This is a mistake, she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. You know I have insurance. Calloway chuckled, low and condescending. Be quiet, he said. Unless you want resisting arrest added to the list. He clicked the handcuffs around her wrists. The cold metal bit into her skin. And then, as he shoved her toward the squad car, he leaned in and whispered, You think you can do whatever you want? His smirk widened. Not today. As Ariana was forced into the back seat of the police cruiser, staring out the tinted windows at the fading light of day, she made a silent vow. He was going to regret this, not with violence, not with revenge, but with the truth. The fluorescent lights of the Fairfax County Police Station buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare over the booking area. Ariana Cole sat stiffly on the cold metal bench, her wrists aching from the handcuffs that had only just been removed. The room smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, a sterile and unwelcoming place designed to break the spirit of those forced to sit within its walls. Calloway had walked her in with a triumphant swagger, all but parading her like a trophy. The other officers barely spared her a glance, whether because they trusted Calloway or simply didn't care. She couldn't tell. Take a seat, the booking officer grunted, barely looking up from his paperwork. Ariana bit her tongue, knowing that snapping back wouldn't help her. Instead, she focused on steadying her breathing, keeping her posture straight. She wasn't just some woman off the street. She wasn't powerless. But for now, she had to play it smart. The processing took longer than necessary. It felt deliberate. The officer handling her paperwork, Rodriguez, seemed hesitant, occasionally shooting her glances like he knew something wasn't adding up. But Calloway was standing nearby, arms crossed, exuding an air of untouchability. Rodriguez sighed and proceeded with the motions. Full name, Ariana answered. Date of birth, another clipped response. Do you have any distinguishing marks, scars, or tattoos? She exhaled sharply. No. The questions continued, each one digging at her patience. Then came the worst part, her mugshot. She stood against the white backdrop, staring straight into the camera as the flash went off. The humiliation burned deep, but she refused to let it show. Fingerprints came next, ink on her fingers. Press, roll, repeat. She felt like a criminal. When they were done, Calloway reappeared, a smug grin plastered across his face. "You're lucky I'm not tossing you in a cell with real criminals," he said casually. Ariana gave him a pointed look, her voice even. "I didn't do anything illegal," Calloway chuckled. "We'll see about that." He turned to Rodriguez. "Make sure she doesn't get her call for a while." Rodriguez hesitated but then nodded. Ariana's stomach tightened. This was a game to Calloway. He wanted her to sit, stew, and feel powerless. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Hours passed. Ariana sat in a holding cell, arms crossed, her mind racing. She replayed the events over and over, analyzing every detail like she would a cyber threat. Calloway had lied about her swerving, lied about the brake light, lied about her insurance. That meant he had planned this. But why? Had she just been unlucky? Or was there something more? The ache in her muscles from sitting in the cold cell faded into the background as her analytical mind took over. Calloway was too confident, too sure she wouldn't fight back. That meant he had done this before, and gotten away with it. A clanking noise snapped her out of her thoughts. A guard approached her cell, keys jingling. "You get one call." Ariana stood immediately, masking her relief as she followed the guard out into the hallway. She was led to a phone mounted on the wall. No privacy. She picked up the receiver and dialed the one number she knew by heart, Veronica Hayes. The line rang once, twice, then "This is Veronica." Her voice was sharp, professional, and instantly calming. Ariana didn't waste time. "Veronica, it's me. I'm at Fairfax County Station. Calloway arrested me on false charges." A pause. Then, "Tell me everything." Ariana quickly summarized what had happened: the fabricated swerving, the non-existent brake light issue, the bogus insurance claim. Veronica exhaled sharply. "That bastard." Ariana allowed herself a small smile. "So you've heard of him?" "I have. Calloway's got a reputation, but no one's been able to bring him down. Every complaint against him gets lost or settled out of court." Ariana clenched her jaw. "Then maybe it's time someone did." Veronica's voice was steel. "I'm on my way. Don't say another word to anyone. I'll handle this." The line went dead. Ariana exhaled. For the first time since this nightmare started, she felt like she had a real shot at fighting back, but she wasn't done yet. As soon as Ariana was escorted back to her cell, she sat down and ran her fingers through her braids. Her mind was still working. She had another card to play. Slipping her hands under the sleeves of her jacket, she carefully pressed the tiny biometric scanner embedded in the fabric, a discreet device connected to a secure NSA network. She couldn't access classified systems from here, but she could send an emergency signal to someone who could help. Lucas Grant. Lucas was one of her most trusted colleagues at the NSA, a cybersecurity specialist with an uncanny ability to dig up hidden dirt on just about anyone. Her message was simple: "Need info on Brett Calloway, Fairfax County PD. Past complaints, lawsuits, anything unusual." It took less than 10 minutes for a response to flash across her hidden screen. "Lucas, you in trouble, Ariana. Nothing I can't handle, just need to know what I'm up against." Lucas didn't question her further. Ariana paced her cell, waiting. After another 20 minutes, her sleeve buzzed again. She discreetly glanced at the screen. "Lucas, Calloway has a pattern. 2 lawsuits for racial profiling, settled out of court. Multiple excessive force complaints, not enough evidence to take action. Guy should have been fired years ago." Ariana's stomach twisted. She had known it was bad, but this was worse than she imagined. "Lucas, also, something's off. The department is stalling on releasing his body cam footage. That's never a good sign." Ariana smirked despite herself. They're covering for him, Lucas. Looks that way. Ariana knew what that meant. If they were trying to bury evidence, then that evidence was worth digging up. She sent one final message. Keep an eye out. I have a feeling things are about to get interesting. By the time Veronica arrived at the station, Ariana was more than ready. Calloway, ever the smug bastard, had been waiting outside the cell area, probably expecting Ariana to beg or plead. Instead, she stood tall, chin lifted, unshaken. Veronica's heels clicked against the tile as she strode in like she owned the place. She didn't spare Calloway a glance. Her eyes were locked onto Ariana. "Let's get you out of here," she said. Ariana nodded. Calloway scoffed. "She's not going anywhere until I say so." Veronica turned to him, smiling coldly. "Oh, I think she is, and I'd love to see you try to stop me." For the first time, Calloway looked uncertain. Ariana folded her arms. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was about to challenge an entire corrupt system, and she wasn't backing down. The air in the Fairfax County Courthouse was thick with tension. Ariana Cole sat beside her attorney, Veronica Hayes, in the defendant's chair, her back straight, her expression composed. But inside, her mind was running at full speed, analyzing every detail, every possible angle. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person Calloway had ever wronged. Every time he had gotten away with bending the law to his own benefit. If she let this slide, he'd do it again, to someone else, someone who might not have the resources or the training to fight back. So today, she wasn't just defending herself. She was going on the offensive. The judge, an older woman named Margaret Linwood, called the court to session. She had a reputation for being fair, but also strict. No nonsense. Exactly the kind of judge Ariana hoped for. Across the courtroom, Richard Monroe, the prosecutor, adjusted his tie and stood. He was a sharp-looking man in his mid-40s with the slick confidence of someone used to winning. He had close ties with the police department, and it was clear from his demeanor that he wasn't just here to prosecute a case. He was here to protect one of their own. Monroe began with a well-rehearsed speech about law and order and holding citizens accountable. He described Ariana as uncooperative and belligerent, painting a picture of a woman who had escalated a routine traffic stop into an unnecessary confrontation. The defendant refused to comply with simple instructions, Monroe stated, pacing the floor. She resisted lawful orders, failed to produce valid insurance, and attempted to obstruct an investigation. Ariana clenched her fists under the table, lie after lie. Veronica, however, remained calm, her expression unreadable. She had been in too many of these battles to be rattled. Monroe called his first witness, Officer Brett Calloway. Calloway walked up to the stand, his uniform crisp, his posture rigid. He played the part of the dutiful officer perfectly, answering Monroe's questions in a measured, authoritative tone. "She was aggressive from the start," Calloway claimed. "She questioned my authority, refused to step out of the vehicle initially, and became defensive when I asked about her insurance." Ariana's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Then, Monroe pulled out the supposed expired insurance report and waved it like a smoking gun. "This document right here," Monroe said, turning to the jury, "proves that Miss Cole was operating her vehicle without valid insurance. The arrest was fully justified." He stepped back confidently. "No further questions." Veronica stood immediately. "Your Honor, I'd like to cross-examine." Judge Linwood nodded. "Proceed." Veronica strode toward Calloway with the ease of a seasoned fighter stepping into the ring. "Officer Calloway," she began, her voice smooth but firm, "you claimed that my client's insurance was expired when you arrested her." "That's correct," Calloway said without hesitation. Veronica nodded. "Would you be surprised if I told you that was a lie?" A murmur ran through the courtroom. Monroe frowned. Objection, argumentative. Judge Linwood raised a hand. Sustained, Miss Hayes, stick to the facts. Veronica smiled politely. Of course, Your Honor. She turned back to Calloway. Officer, do you recognize this document? She held up a printed insurance verification. Calloway hesitated. It's my client's valid insurance policy, Veronica interrupted smoothly, which was active on the date of the arrest. Would you like to read the expiration date aloud for the court? Calloway's lips thinned. No need, Veronica continued, holding it up for the jury to see, because it clearly states that the policy was valid and did not expire for another 6 months. A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Veronica turned to the judge. Your Honor, I move to have the insurance charge dismissed immediately, as it is now evident that it was completely fabricated. Judge Linwood took the document, examined it, then looked at Monroe. Mr. Monroe. Monroe's jaw was tight, his composure slipping for the first time. Judge Linwood didn't wait. The charge regarding expired insurance is hereby dismissed. Ariana let out a quiet breath. Step 1 complete. Veronica wasn't done. Now, Officer Calloway, she continued, pacing slightly, you also claimed that my client was uncooperative and that her behavior justified her arrest, correct? Calloway nodded. That's right. Veronica pulled a small USB drive from her pocket. Your Honor, I would like to submit new evidence. Monroe stiffened. What evidence? Veronica smiled. A recording recovered from Officer Calloway's patrol vehicle. She handed the drive to the court clerk, who inserted it into the system. A moment later, the audio played over the speakers, a crackling sound, then Calloway's voice, cold and unmistakable. I'll find a way to get her. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Calloway's face drained of color. Monroe looked like someone had just punched him in the gut. Veronica turned back to Calloway. Officer, can you explain to the court why, before any alleged infractions, you were already planning to find a way to arrest my client? Calloway's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Veronica let the silence stretch, then turned to the judge. Your Honor, this recording directly contradicts the officer's sworn testimony. This was not a lawful arrest. This was targeted harassment. Judge Linwood nodded gravely. This evidence is deeply troubling. Mr. Monroe, how does the prosecution respond? Monroe knew he was losing, but he wasn't ready to back down yet. Monroe took a deep breath and straightened his tie. Your Honor, while this is an unfortunate misunderstanding, we must also consider another element of this case. He turned toward the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, did you know that Miss Cole works in national security? Ariana's heart skipped a beat. Veronica's posture stiffened. Monroe continued, feigning concern. In fact, there are some indications that she may have ties to foreign intelligence agencies. Ariana inhaled sharply. Monroe was trying to turn the case against her. Ariana saw the murmurs ripple through the jury box. She could almost hear their thoughts. A black woman involved in cybersecurity, foreign intelligence. Could she be dangerous? It was a smear tactic, a desperate attempt to shift the narrative, and she knew exactly what she had to do. She looked at Veronica. Veronica met her gaze. A silent understanding passed between them. This was the moment. Ariana stood up. Your Honor, she said clearly, I would like to speak on my own behalf. Judge Linwood studied her for a moment, then nodded. Proceed. Ariana reached into her bag. She pulled out a sleek black leather case and carefully flipped it open. Inside, gleaming under the courtroom lights, was her NSA identification badge. She handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The room went silent. Ariana met Monroe's stunned gaze head-on. I am a senior analyst at the National Security Agency, she said, her voice steady. And I can assure you that any claim suggesting I have foreign ties is not only false, it's preposterous. She straightened her posture. This officer targeted me, he lied, and now you're trying to cover for him. She looked around the courtroom, but I am not someone you can silence. The battle wasn't just turning, it was over. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. You could feel it in the air, thick, heavy, almost suffocating. Every person in the room was hanging on Ariana's next move as if the very fate of the case hung in the balance. She sat still, but inside her heart was pounding. This was the moment she would finally tear down the lies and prove her innocence, not just to this courtroom, but to the world. Ariana took a deep breath, her eyes locked on the judge, Margaret Linwood, who was now observing her with a keen, calculating gaze. The prosecutor, Richard Monroe, was standing near his desk, still trying to regain his composure after the blow Veronica had dealt earlier with the damning evidence, the recording of Calloway's own words. But Monroe wasn't done yet. He'd thrown out the accusation about Ariana's alleged connections to foreign intelligence, and even though it was baseless, the seed of doubt had been planted. He had tried to paint her as someone with something to hide. Ariana knew that if she let that accusation linger for even a moment longer, it could destroy everything she had worked for. The truth needed to be out in the open, and there was only one way to do that. With a deliberate motion, Ariana stood up. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor was sharp and unmistakable. It was as if the room collectively held its breath. "Your Honor," Ariana said, her voice steady, clear, and cutting through the noise of the courtroom, "these accusations are completely false." She paused, letting her words sink in, knowing that the next few seconds would change everything. "But to defend my integrity," she continued, her eyes now sweeping over the room, making eye contact with the jurors, the judge, and the prosecution, "I must reveal something important." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. People began to shift in their seats. Ariana's stomach twisted, but she kept her face neutral, calm, collected. She wasn't just Ariana Cole, a woman being falsely accused. She was more than that, and she was ready to show them who she truly was. With a swift, precise motion, Ariana reached into her bag. The courtroom seemed to freeze as she pulled out a sleek black leather case, its edges soft but firm in her hand. She held it for a moment, steadying her nerves before carefully opening it. Inside was her NSA identification badge. She held it up for the judge to see, her eyes unwavering. There was a collective gasp as the entire courtroom fell silent. Ariana didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her actions spoke louder than anything she could have said. The badge in her hand gleamed in the light, official, undeniable, irrefutable. The bold watermark of the National Security Agency glowed like a beacon in the silence. The judge, Margaret Linwood, slowly took the badge from the bailiff, her fingers trembling slightly as she studied it. Her eyes flickered over it, confirming its authenticity, the weight of the moment settling in. Monroe stood frozen, his jaw slack, unable to respond. Calloway's face drained of color as he turned to look at Ariana, his smug expression replaced by one of shock and disbelief. He had never expected this. He had never expected Ariana Cole to reveal her true identity in front of an entire courtroom. "NSA identification," Judge Linwood finally said, her voice measured, and even though there was a trace of admiration in her tone. "Miss Cole, are you telling the court that you work for the National Security Agency?" Ariana nodded once, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Yes, Your Honor. I am a senior analyst with a top-secret clearance. I work in national security and have been involved in operations that protect this country from cyber threats and foreign adversaries." The room seemed to exhale in unison. People shifted in their seats, exchanging looks of disbelief and confusion. Calloway, still standing near the witness stand, had his mouth open, but no words came out. "Is that why you've been falsely accused, Officer Calloway?" Ariana asked, her voice calm but pointed. "Is that why you chose to lie about me? Because you didn't think anyone would question you?" Calloway's face was pale, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. He opened his mouth to say something but quickly shut it, unable to find words. Ariana turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I've been harassed, mistreated, and falsely accused by this officer, Officer Brett Calloway, who has a history of excessive force and racial profiling. His actions were not about justice. They were personal. He targeted me because he thought he could get away with it." Judge Linwood carefully studied the badge once more, then placed it on the table in front of her. Her expression shifted from one of careful consideration to one of disbelief. "This revelation," she said slowly, "has serious implications. If what you're saying is true, Miss Cole, this officer has engaged in abusive conduct, not just toward you but perhaps others as well." Ariana's heart raced. She felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. The truth was out now. There would be no turning back for Calloway. Judge Linwood looked up at Monroe and then to the rest of the courtroom. "The charges against Miss Cole are hereby dismissed." Ariana held her breath. She had expected this outcome, but hearing it said out loud in the courtroom was a moment she would never forget. The entire atmosphere shifted. What was once a hostile environment suddenly felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. But even though she had won this battle, Ariana knew the war wasn't over. "Internal Affairs will begin an investigation into Officer Calloway's actions," the judge continued, her voice firm. "This matter is far from settled." Ariana turned slightly to look at Calloway. He was standing stock still, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. He wasn't done yet. She could see it in his eyes. He was a man who'd been caught, but he wouldn't go down quietly. She didn't need to hear his next words to know they were coming. She could already tell he was going to fight this, that he would dig in his heels and do everything in his power to destroy her. But she was ready. She wasn't some naive woman who didn't understand the consequences of standing up to someone like him. No, Ariana was far from naive. She had the truth on her side. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could win this fight. After the judge's ruling, there was a rush of activity as people filed out of the courtroom. But Ariana stayed seated, her body numb with adrenaline, her hands still trembling. Veronica sat beside her, offering her a small, knowing smile. "You did good, Ariana." Ariana glanced at Veronica, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "This isn't over." Veronica's smile faltered, but she nodded. "No, it's not. Calloway's going to try something else, but we've got him now." Ariana's eyes flickered back to Calloway as he was escorted out by another officer. His face was dark with rage, but it was clear. The battle had only just begun. But she wasn't afraid. She knew that this was the turning point. And no matter what came next, she would face it head-on, knowing that she had already won the most important battle of all. The truth had been exposed. The week following the court's ruling felt like a blur to Ariana. The news coverage exploded across local and national platforms, with reporters dissecting every detail of the trial. Officer Brett Calloway's name became synonymous with police corruption and misconduct. His past complaints and lawsuits, long buried and dismissed by the system, were now laid bare for the public to see. The exposure was swift, relentless, and unforgiving. Fairfax County was forced to take action. The police department issued a statement confirming that Calloway had been suspended pending an internal investigation. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. There were talks of reopening his previous lawsuits, the ones that had been quietly swept under the rug. The civil rights community rallied around Ariana, sharing her story as a testament to the power of persistence and truth. It felt like the world was finally taking notice. Ariana, for her part, remained focused. She knew this was just the beginning. The system wasn't going to collapse overnight, not because of one police officer. But she had made her stand, and she would not back down now. The battle for justice had just begun. She spent her days at the NSA, diving into the intricate world of cybersecurity, her mind once again consumed by the importance of her work. But even as she immersed herself in cryptography and national security matters, her thoughts kept drifting back to Calloway, to the fight she had just won, and the one that was still looming ahead. It was an ordinary Wednesday afternoon when Ariana stepped out of the grocery store. She had just finished picking up a few things for dinner, some fresh vegetables, a loaf of bread, a bottle of wine. Nothing out of the ordinary. The weather was crisp, the late afternoon sun casting a soft glow over the parking lot as she made her way back to her car. She was about to unlock her door when she felt a cold shiver crawl up her spine. A familiar presence. She turned around slowly, her eyes locking on Calloway. He was standing there, just a few feet away, leaning against his car. His face was twisted in something between bitterness and disbelief. His eyes, once full of arrogance and self-assurance, now held something darker, anger, regret, and a tinge of fear. Ariana's heart rate quickened. Her first instinct was to walk away, to get into her car and drive off. But she didn't. She stood her ground. She couldn't let him intimidate her, not anymore. Calloway pushed himself off the hood of his car and took a few steps toward her. There was no smile on his face, no cocky grin, just a deep frown. "Do you realize," he muttered, his voice cold, "you just ruined my career?" Ariana's gaze never wavered. He thought she was responsible for the downfall he had brought upon himself. It wasn't the system. It wasn't the countless victims of his abuse. It wasn't his own actions that had caused this. No, it was Ariana's fault. She met his glare with calm confidence. "I didn't ruin your career, Calloway." Her voice was steady, almost casual, but there was steel beneath it. "You did." For a moment, Calloway's expression flickered with confusion, as if he couldn't process her response. He took a step closer, his fists clenched at his sides. He was almost shaking with rage, but Ariana stood unmoved, her feet planted firmly on the ground. "You think you're some kind of hero," Calloway hissed, his face inches from hers now. His breath was hot with anger. "You think you've done some great thing. You've ruined me. You've ruined everything." Ariana didn't flinch. She didn't back down. She didn't even raise her voice. She simply looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "You ruined yourself," she replied, every word measured. "You made those choices. You abused your power. And now you want to blame me." Calloway's nostrils flared as he took a deep breath, the anger boiling over. He opened his mouth to say something, but Ariana cut him off. "No, Calloway," she said, her voice low but firm. "You're the one who crossed the line. You're the one who thought you could get away with it. That's on you, not me." The silence between them grew thick. She could see the gears turning in his head. He was still trying to rationalize it, trying to find a way to make it her fault. But deep down, he knew. He knew she was right. He narrowed his eyes at her as though trying to force some kind of apology or excuse from his mouth. But none came. Instead, he just stared at her for a moment, defeated, before letting out a low growl of frustration. Then, without another word, Calloway turned on his heel and stormed off, heading for his car. Ariana stood still, watching him leave, her mind racing. She wasn't worried about what he might do. She wasn't worried about any threats he might make. He was a man cornered by his own lies, and he knew it. The system that had once protected him was finally turning its back. As he drove away, Ariana exhaled slowly, letting the tension slip from her shoulders. But even as Calloway's figure disappeared from view, Ariana couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. It couldn't be. Not yet. She had fought for justice, and while the immediate victory was hers, she knew that men like Calloway didn't go down without a fight. She wasn't naive. She knew that his fall from grace would not be the end of her battle. There were more like him, more officers, more systems, more people who would protect their own, even if it meant covering up corruption and abuse. Ariana wasn't about to stop here. She couldn't. The truth had to be told. She had to keep pushing for reform, for accountability. She had to keep fighting. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the others who had been hurt by officers like Calloway, those who didn't have the voice or the resources to stand up. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She pulled it out, seeing Veronica's name flash on the screen. Ariana answered. "I was just thinking about you," Veronica said, her voice light but serious. "You did great today, but there's more work to do. We've got to keep pushing, keep gathering evidence, keep exposing what's been hidden. The fight's not over yet." Ariana smiled, her resolve solidifying once again. "I know, but we've made a good start. I'm not backing down." "I didn't think you would," Veronica replied with a chuckle. "I'll be in touch soon. Stay safe, all right." Ariana hung up, her thoughts turning to the road ahead. There would be more battles, more challenges, but she was ready. She had to be. This wasn't just about holding one officer accountable. This was about changing the system, about making sure that the truth always came first, no matter how hard the fight. She wouldn't rest until it was done. The battle wasn't over.